Good evening. Welcome you back tonight to our evening time of study together. Glad that you're with us. And the outline handout for tonight is new, and so everybody did pick up one of those. We have plenty, I think. Anybody need an outline for tonight? You'll notice, I'll mention this when we get to it, some of it is backtracking over what we did a couple of weeks ago, and so we won't go back over that material again, but it was a way to kind of put in your hands some of that we walked our way through a couple of weeks ago. Before we take any prayer concerns, a couple of announcements to mention. One, next Sunday night we will not have Bible study. It is the Awana Commencement Night, Award Night, and so we'll be with them next week as we hear all that they have learned and be a part of celebrating another good year for Awana. So, just so you know, for next Sunday night, that is what we'll be doing. We will be with Awana. Also wanted to go ahead and give you a heads up. Some of you may know this, but just as we look to the summer, this is a year that I will be taking a sabbatical. And so that is coming up the week after VBS, and so then for the next month. All right, so June 19th, 26th, 3rd, and July 3rd and July 10th. Those are the Sundays that I will be out. Now, I'll be making this announcement more often in the weeks to come for a few reasons. One, just to let you know, just so you don't think, wow, where is the pastor? And next week, oh, wow, where is the pastor? And then the next week, oh, he's finally left. All right, no, so that's not what has happened. So it is. This is regularly scheduled, and we get them every 5 years, and so this is the time where we'll be taking that this summer. But I also emphasize this just as a way to remind you that you come on Sunday because you love Christ. And I know I'm preaching to the choir for this crowd, but I want you to spread this as if to say, here's what the pastor said. So the only Sundays you don't have to come are those that don't represent the resurrection of Christ. All right? Okay. All right. So we recognize that it is not the one in the pulpit. He is not the head of the church. Christ is the head of the church. We are just stewards. Now, you can trust that I will provide for you those who love the Word and will teach you the Word. So, there'll still be God's people gathered to worship. So I just want to emphasize that. I want to encourage you to emphasize that with others as we talk more about it. Probably next Sunday morning I'll make this announcement, but this is just kind of a soft launch. All right, so floating it out there ahead of time, and then letting you all then be encouragers to the folks like in your Sunday school classes and that kind of thing. We did well last time. In fact, we had two things working against us the last time I took a sabbatical. One, just that, it was new and kind of different. And then we were renovating the sanctuary, you may recall. So we were also meeting in the Family Life Center for some amount longer than we thought we would, but for sure in the midst of that. So kind of two things going against us, but did well. And you folks were faithful. I have no doubt that you will be as well, again, this year. But again, just as a reminder to you of why we worship together. So just to go ahead and give you a heads up about what's coming. Also, Vacation Bible School asked that you would continue to be praying for VBS. And had a couple of other folks this morning who have agreed to help. And provide some help where we still need that, but there still could be one or two places where you could serve. And so if you're wondering about that, still wondering could you be a part of VBS, then you just see me after the service, after our study tonight. Still ways that you can serve. And like I've mentioned before, that this is not you taking heavy responsibility for all of the teaching. I will be doing the Bible study, and we do our opening assembly, then I teach the Bible study, and then you go back to your classes and review and do activities and have snacks, and then for the half of the time, you are taking the kids around to their different stations, crafts, missions, recreation. So, There are ways you can be an influence with these children, but at the same time, it's not like you're sitting down and having to plan out lessons for every day that you are then teaching. So if that helps things, then let me know, and we can find a place for you to serve. As we pray together tonight, prayer concerns you would mention. Revelation chapter 16, and what we're going to do, we're going to set up where we were. We've already done chapter 16, and we've worked our way through chapter 17. It's been a couple of weeks, and so just to fill us back in and where we are, because this we have been involved in quite a lengthy study here on the tribulation, on the end times, and what is to happen at the end. And as we get to Revelation 16, that is literally the chapter on the end of the world as we know it. That is what this is describing. This is it. The final judgment on the earth. Chapter 16 is the third wave, described by the pouring out, angels pouring out bowls. And so another string of 7 judgments to be poured out on the earth. And this is it. This immediately precedes the coming of Christ. This is at the very end of the tribulation period. And I want to lead in then to chapter 17 and 18 by again just reminding ourselves of the final bowl judgment. So, final wave of judgments, the final judgment of that wave of judgments. Chapter 16, beginning in verse 17. Then the seventh angel poured out his bowl into the air, and a loud voice came out of the temple of heaven from the throne, saying, "It is done." And there were noises and thunderings and lightnings, and there was a great earthquake, such a mighty and great earthquake as had not occurred since men were on the earth. Now the great city was divided into 3 parts, and the cities of the nations fell, and great Babylon was remembered before God, to give her the cup of the wine of the fierceness of His wrath. Then every island fled away, and the mountains were not found, and great hail fell from heaven upon men, each hailstone about the weight of a talent. Men blasphemed God because of the plague of the hail, since that plague was exceedingly great. So then Revelation does what Revelation does, right? It gives us this bit of chronological information. It gives us, so this judgment, this judgment, this judgment. And once it finishes this wave, and this has happened with all 3 waves of judgment, there has been information added back in. So we get to chapters 17 and 18, and what's being described in 17 and 18 is further information on what really happens in that final bowl judgment. So, verses 17 through 21 in particular, you'll note this description of the great Babylon, right? The great city that falls, this great Babylon being remembered before God, being given the cup of the wine of the fierceness of His wrath. And so then what chapter 17 and 18 do is it comes back along and fills that in. So, what is that going to look like? So technically at the end of 16, we're at the end of human history as we know it now, meaning this immediately precedes the Battle of Armageddon and the coming of Christ. But we get a little bit more information. And really 17 and 18 are helpful chapters in this way, doing for us what some of these other interlude kind of chapters did, not only filling in information, but really encouraging us as God's people. Chapters 17 and 18 further develop what it means that Babylon the Great has fallen. And so right off the bat, it's important that we understand when it's referring to Babylon, it is not referring to the literal city of Babylon, though whatever city is near Babylon would be included, all right? When it says Babylon, this is code for the entirety of the world system that is set up against God. Whatever is involved in the way this world operates that does so in rebellion against God. In whatever facet, in terms of religion, politics, cultural issues, economics, these elements that are aligned against God and His Word. Babylon stands for that. When it talks about this great city falling, it is literally talking about the world system that which is in place, dominating even now. Granted, it's under the sovereignty of God, but this world, when I say world, I don't mean the physical earth. When I say this world, I don't mean necessarily a specific individual in it. When I say world, I'm using it much the way much of the Bible does. The system that is in place, that is in rebellion to God, and the features of that, and how that encourages us then to follow after that which would dishonor God. So, it's one of the important points, I think, of the book of Revelation, of studying the end times. We definitely come into a study like this, and we talked about this at the very beginning. We come into a study on Revelation wanting all the details, right? We want timelines. We want to know what's going to happen when. We even maybe want some of the juicy, dramatic parts, right? The story is a captivating one. And so we are interested in some of these elements. And there's nothing wrong necessarily with being interested in some of these elements, so long as we don't miss the point. And the fundamental point of the book is Christ reigns. You don't even need more words in the sentence than that. That is it. Christ reigns. This is what Revelation is reminding us of. It's also giving us another point. Not just that Christ reigns, but that God judges. So if you come away from the book of Revelation and you don't think anything about the reign and rule of Christ in His second coming, you've missed the point. If you get through Revelation and you don't understand something about God's judgment, you've missed the point. All right, that's a major point of the book. Now, my guess is we recognize this. If I were to say, hey, what are the major points of the book of Revelation? Somebody's going to say, well, judgment. Somebody else for sure is going to say, well, it's the second coming. But there is this third issue, and that is the demise of the world. It is the dismantling of this system that is aligned against God. Now, the use of Babylon as being kind of the key focal point is an interesting one. Anybody tell me the history of Babylon? Where does Babylon come from? All right, Genesis 11. Do you remember what was it they were doing in Babylon? All right, they were building a tower to the heavens. And do you remember what God did to them? All right, He confused their languages and scattered them, right? All right, so Babylon then becomes that imagery. And so not only do we go back to that, but of course we know Babylon features prominently in the history of Israel. Babylon being that place that attacks Judah, takes captives back to Babylon. So we're familiar with that. But in terms of its imagery, Babylon really goes back to that Genesis 11. And this one of the earliest examples, if not the kind of earliest example post-flood of the rebellion of humanity and this desire to cast off the authority of God and make ourselves the authority, right? They are creating their own way. They're building their own tower. And God even says there's nothing they cannot accomplish. It's really a profound statement God makes, which is a whole other sermon, all right? But interesting, so that's interesting what happens there. He confuses their language, and then he scatters them. So what happens here at the end? Well, you have this attempt to bring them all back together again, right? And this is what's going to happen. The kings of the nations are going to be gathered back together at the Battle of Armageddon. So Babylon is standing for this. Now, you can see in chapters 17 and 18 this detailing of the demise of the worldly system. 2 weeks ago, we looked at chapter 17. You'll note there in your notes, I've given you a bit of an outline. We walked our way through the chapter, but I didn't have an outline in front of you. But looking at Revelation chapter 17, it gives us the first part of how this system is dismantled, focusing specifically on the false religion. The ways in which they had pursued their own means of being made right. This rejection then of God, of His sovereignty, of His gospel, and this pursuit of their own way of faith. And chapter 17 doesn't leave much to the imagination. I mean, it's described as the great harlot, right? And this is how this false system is described. This false system then, coming to its head at the end of time, being motivated by Satan, the Antichrist, and the false prophet, leading the world astray. That the pinnacle moment of false religion is when the Antichrist is established as the one to be worshipped. In fact, you could argue that the last time the world was truly unified was the Tower of Babel, and the next time it will have a similar kind of unity is at the end of time. That the masses are going to be led astray. The influence of the Antichrist is going to be pervasive. And so it's really going to be a time where a lot of people are going to come together. It's strange, but there will be, at least for a period of time, a type of peace. A lot of people are going to come together, and they're going to come under kind of this conglomeration of religious ideas and be led astray then eventually to engaging in idolatry itself. So what I've identified chapter 17 as, you see there in your notes, as really spiritual adultery. And this is what they're guilty of, spiritual adultery. And it goes on then to describe that in a variety of ways. We've already walked our way through chapter 17, and what was helpful about chapter 17 is we get verses 1 through 6 where this imagery is recounted to us. John sees this, this, and this. And then verse 7 is really helpful because it tells us, I will tell you the mystery of the things that you have just seen. And so then the rest of the chapter then goes on to say, well, the horns are this, and the heads are this, and it gives us a bit of an explanation of all of these various parts. Again, chapter 17 is focusing really on this false religion and how it is dismantled. Part of it coming apart is going to come apart here at the end. By the way, this chapter is also filling in something important. We read that last bold judgment and perhaps may ask the question, why is there such fierce wrath? And we've dealt with this along the way. It's a question that often comes up when you read about God's judgment. I mean, on the one hand, we recognize sin needs judgment, right? And we recognize wickedness needs to be held accountable. And we believe that those who are committed to doing wickedly should suffer consequences for it. But then when we read what it actually sounds like, it's kind of like, ow, that seems harsh. That seems severe. And the seventh bowl seems severe. And so chapters 17 and 18 really remind us of why that judgment is necessary. These are a hardened people. You'll notice how chapter 17 ends, verse 17. For God has put it into their hearts to fulfill His purpose, to be of one mind and to give their kingdom to the beast until the words of God are fulfilled. And the woman who you saw is that great city which reigns over the kings of the earth. So this is their nature, that they have given themselves over to the kingdom of the beast. It's been put in their hearts to do so, but yet this is also their very nature, to rebel against God. And we've seen this along the way, right? Various times there are these judgments, and what do the people do? They blaspheme God. In fact, the text has been specific. They blaspheme God because the judgment comes from God. They don't blaspheme God because they are victims of chance and circumstance that God could have intervened and done something about. They blaspheme God because they know His anger is upon them. So they can't claim ignorance here. They can't throw up their hands and say, we don't know what this is. This seems really unfair. God had given warning after warning and opportunity. There had been witnesses to the gospel. This did not have to be their final end, but it will be because they've continued to engage in rebellion. All right, before we jump into chapter 18, Questions or comments, maybe 1,000 of them. Need any clarity on the timing of things? All right, so as we jump into chapter 18, we continue to see language about what's happening in chapter 16 and that seventh bowl. And now it's going to get even more intense. So chapter 17 had highlighted for us, again, what was the wickedness of the religious system of the day. Now chapter 18 is going to jump all the way in to describing what's going to happen at the end. And I've given you kind of some points there of really application. I find this to be important as we talk about the book of Revelation. This is not just something that is interesting for a group of people who are going to live then someday, all right? Revelation is God's Word to you, and it is useful for making you like Christ, and right, for training in righteousness, and for reproving and correcting and making sure we are the people of God. So I think as we read chapter 18, walk our way through it, we're going to see at least 3 encouragements from this chapter. I mean, what God is doing in this chapter, what He'd be reminding the people in 95 AD, what He's reminding us in 2022. And this is the fundamental principle. And I don't know if I've put it in your notes quite like this, but you could write this down. The world is not worthy of your love. The world is not worthy of your love. The world is not worthy of your affection. The world is not worthy of your devotion. That as God's people, we need to manage what it means to be in the world, but not of the world. And chapter 18 is just a great illustration of this. Granted, it's got some weird stuff in it, because it's Revelation, right? What would Revelation be without weird stuff? All right? I don't know, it'd be Romans. I don't know, but so it's Revelation, so there's weird stuff in it. So there is a little bit of that, but I think as we see it fall out, this final word, God is telling us how this world will end and how the system that is in place, again, will fall apart. Chapter 18 is a good one to have in mind as you watch the news or read about the news or see things as they are. This is just a good reminder to us of the future of these things. So, 3 encouragements to keep in mind. Number 1, believe the coming destruction of the world. The world is not worthy of your love because the world will be destroyed. It will be. Now, don't misunderstand what I'm saying about this. I'm not suggesting you can't go to the Grand Canyon and think, wow, this is a beautiful creation of God, all right? I'm not suggesting you can't enjoy a day at the beach or spend a week in the mountains. In other words, when I say love the world, I do want to be clear. There's a lot of things in this created world that are worth your time and are for your enjoyment. Take advantage of them, all right? God was the one who made the science possible that gives us ice cream. All right? So I'm going to eat ice cream. I glorify God, okay, when I do it, okay? So God made the science that made that work. That you churn it and it's the cream and anyway, okay. So God made that work. So there's things about the world that we enjoy. So I'm not discouraging that. There are expressions of art and culture and entertainment that are fine to consume. But even then, we should remember these are still limited and temporary. This is not our forever existence. This is not as good as things get. And that's good news, by the way. This is not as good as it gets. It gets way, way better. And so we do well to remember this, that this world system is going to come to its end. So notice how this is described. Beginning in chapter 18, verse 1. After these things, I saw another angel coming down from heaven, having great authority, and the earth was illuminated with his glory. And he cried mightily with a loud voice, saying, Babylon the Great is fallen, and has become a dwelling place of demons, a prison for every foul spirit, and a cage for every unclean and hated bird. For all the nations have drunk of the wine of the wrath of her fornication. The kings of the earth have committed fornication with her, and the merchants of the earth have become rich through the abundance of her luxury. Now, really, verse 3 is a bit of a foreshadowing of language that's going to be used in the rest of chapter 18. But this next message that John hears, that he describes as an angel having great authority. It's another interesting insight into the nature of angels. Really, I don't think there's any other book of the Bible that I'm aware of that gives us really more information about angels than the book of Revelation. Though we've got to be careful because it's really still pretty mysterious. But we've seen great angels, right? There are weirdly described angels. But this is some kind of angel here. The fact that John feels compelled to describe him as having great authority. I mean, anytime an angel shows up in the Bible, these guys are always, they scare whoever they show up to, right? So in my mind, any angel seems to have some kind of authority and glory on him. But now John is describing this one as having great authority. And that the earth is illuminated with his glory. Now, I don't want to lead anyone to think anything differently here. We need to make sure this is just an angel. I don't think this is describing Jesus. This is one thing you'll find. Some people who study Revelation, they will identify any of these kinds of angels as being Jesus. I just don't see it. I think this is just an angel. A glorious angel. Maybe one of the archangels. Maybe Michael. Maybe Gabriel. Maybe another unnamed one, all right? But whoever he is uniquely created by God, I think, and has a unique kind of authority. He brings on him the glory of God, perhaps unlike other angels. I mean, you hate to say run-of-the-mill angels, but there must be run-of-the-mill angels, right? I mean, there's your regular angels, and then there are these others, which actually Satan was one of these others, right? Morning star, brightest and fairest of them all. So God definitely has a created order among the angels, but his message is clear. Babylon is fallen, and that language of it's become a dwelling place of demons. So again, he is going ahead and uttering what is the fundamental result of that seventh bowl. That is the destruction of this world. To say that it is fallen, it's language meaning it has collapsed. It has come to nothing. Whatever strength and power and influence it had, it's no longer. And then to suggest it's now just a place for demons and foul things. That this means it has now been utterly destroyed. Now, there's a final judgment to come, right? There's still the Battle of Armageddon. There's still the second coming. And then, of course, there is a final judgment even to come after that. But this is a way of describing what's going to happen to this world. And then verse 3 giving that warning. This is the world. And he uses a strong word. This is the world in which the kings and the merchants have fornicated with. And that's just a graphic term, right? But that's I think, an appropriate one. They've given themselves in full to this system, and it is now about to fall. And this, I think, is also a reminder to us that everything about this system that is successful only because in its, God in His allowance, in its rebellion, it is satanically empowered. That's the only reason why there's any kind of power or success to it. So believe the coming destruction of this world. I know that's a hard message sometimes, right? But I just think we do well to remember this as God's people. God's people living in this day and now. When is this going to happen? I don't have any idea. But I do think it is wise. It's wise for us when, especially in those moments when we consume too much news. Right? Okay. When we consume too much of it so that we become despondent or despair. I mean, I understand these are difficult, even grievous kinds of times, right? They grieve the soul. But this is the destiny of this planet. It will come to nothing. The affairs of this world will come to nothing. Will fall. All of it. All of it will fall. So we do well to remind ourselves of that. If we're going to invest our emotional energy into something, let us invest our emotional energy into that which is everlasting, right? So, believe the coming destruction of this world. Number 2, there's a second principle, and that is disentangle from the trappings of the world. Disentangle. That was a word that I read in a commentary that I thought was a great way to describe this language. Disentangling, kind of like a Hebrews 12, where we're not to be, entangled in this world. So similar kind of language. So notice how it goes on to describe this. Verse 4. And I heard another voice from heaven saying, which by the way, clearly not as impressive as the other, right? I mean, it's not that this voice wasn't a profound one or powerful one. Now, some may say, all right, this is God Himself speaking. Perhaps. I just mean there's no other distinction made. I heard another voice from heaven saying, come out of her, my people, lest you share in her sins, and lest you receive of her plagues, for her sins have reached to heaven, and God has remembered her iniquities. Come out from her. It's just a message then to God's people to not be entangled with the worldly system. Again, to be in the world, but not of the world. So come out from among them, my people. Make sure you don't find yourself sharing in her sins. In verse 6, render to her, just as she rendered to you, and repay her double according to her works, and the cup which she has mix double for her. In the measure that she glorified herself and lived luxuriously, in the same measure give her torment and sorrow. For she says in her heart, I sit as queen, and am no widow, and will not see sorrow. Therefore her plagues will come in one day, death and mourning and famine. And she will be utterly burned with fire, for strong is the Lord who judges her. Again, just really striking imagery about the judgment to come. That I think the real point is, it's making the emphasis to God's people, again, do not become entangled with this world. It is going to receive the fierceness of God's wrath. It is going to receive the fierceness of God's judgment. It's going to receive true justice. It's going to experience true righteousness. And you don't want to be all mixed up with her when it happens. And that language there where it says, render to her just as she rendered to you, that's not saying you and I get to take judgment out. It's like a cry coming to say, all right, judge in a way that is appropriate with how they've indulged. In fact, it even sounds similar to warnings we have in the New Testament about sin, right? That what happens to you with sin, that you can end up reaping what you sow. Now this is just being reflected here. This is what he's getting at. The measure to which they've indulged is the measure to which it will be returned. Which tells you something about their indulgence, doesn't it? I mean, what kind of wrath have we seen? Fierce wrath. And so what the text is telling us is that God's wrath, it's not like God's engaging in overkill here. As we've talked about even in Amos and the minor prophets, when we talk about God's judgment, we're not talking about a God who flies off the handle in a rage. And the kind of person that if you wrong them, they're gonna get you back, but it's gonna be 10 times worse, right? The classic kind of revenge Hollywood movie. That's not what we got going on here. Now, this is God returning upon them the measure equal to what they indulged. And if you then look at the nature of God's judgment, that tells you something about the way they indulged in sin and rebellion. We see then this posture of pride. She says in her heart, I sit as queen. I'm no widow. I will not see sorrow, but plagues are going to come in upon her. So again, the demise of Babylon warning us, so not only believing about this coming destruction, but making sure that we are not becoming too entangled with this world. Now, this is a message coming to them in the day when this happens, but this has application for us, right, as God's people. We need to be cautious about how we are indulging in the world around us. Hugh?
How far do you think that verse 4 goes as far as a message to us that do you think that would give us a message that we shouldn't do business with people who support sin?
So Hugh has asked the question, and I'll repeat it maybe in a way to make sure I understand what you're asking. So does a verse like this suggest we shouldn't be even engaging in business with people who engage in sin? And let me give an example to see if this is the case. So, an example would be Target, right? Target is fully engaged in LGBTQ issues, right? Fully engaged in all of that. We know they made a name for themselves with the bathroom situation, and whatever gender you identify with is the bathroom you can use. Is that what you're getting at, Hugh? So, does this mean then we should cut off all engagement with any of these businesses? Now, I will tell you, I do think there are those who do make that very argument from a verse like this. At the same time, there are a couple of issues, and I'll try and answer this as best I can. Be glad, though, to have a larger discussion, because it does get to an important ethical issue of the day, and that is how do we relate to those who are so clearly antithetical to the things that we believe? And I'm not suggesting we shouldn't try and do this. However, I think if we go and look at the views of everything, that's going to be tricky. So, for example, what car did you drive? Do you know what that company believes about these things? How many of you right now have an Apple product? In here. All right. Does any of us think Tim Cook loves Jesus? All right, the CEO. What about Steve Jobs? Was he a on fire for Jesus kind of guy? Well, no. So in other words, we have these. Do you go to Food Lion? And when you go to Food Lion, do you only buy from the companies who give you products that you agree with? So that's where that gets tricky. So I would say, just kind of fundamentally, I don't think this means we can't ever do business in any form with somebody who's got something we disagree with. Because otherwise, we're going to find ourselves just sitting here and we're going to be dead in the next 48 hours. All right? In other words, we can't buy food anywhere. You can't get back in. What about the gas companies? Do you know everything they believe? Because you got gas in your car. So that's, what about the tire company that has tires on the car? You could begin to get absurd about it, I guess. But at the same time, to answer that issue, though, I do think there is value, Hugh. This is going to sound like a pun. It's just going to work out well. To target companies to use as a way to make a statement. We got to be careful how we make that statement, but I do think so. For example, can we do something? Let me give you a real life example. Something I'm very disturbed about that's going on in the Southern Baptist Convention. The SBC is meeting in Anaheim in June, and they worked out an agreement with Disneyland to give discounts. Okay. Now, if a messenger wants to go to Disneyland, that's their deal. But should the SBC be cooperating as an entity? I would say, absolutely not. Now, are there other entities, like they're renting the convention center in Anaheim? They're in California. There's going to be people they disagree with, right? But this is such a hot topic, and the issue related to Disney, and the issue related to the issue in Florida with Disney World, and all the issue with the educational material, all that's just such a hot issue, one that's addressing very real concerns culturally, biblically. I can see value then in a group of people saying, all right, here's what we're going to do. We're going to say we're not going to do this. I do think a verse like this does at least force us to think carefully about the ways in which we relate to the world around us. And we need to do so carefully, thoughtfully, prayerfully, and in a way that honors our witness, but at the same time recognizes, did Jesus ever do business with people? Did Paul do? For sure Paul did. Paul clearly did business with people who sacrificed meat to idols. So we know that there are allowances there. I would say also this would come down to personal conscience in terms of that question. To what degree do we engage with these companies? Yeah, so Bill brings up an issue, but you could go to Disney and you could share the gospel. You could. And it would be cheaper. Because if you show your SBC credentials, you get in for less, all right? And so you could share the gospel. I think somebody would also say, but you could stand in the parking lot till they ran you out. And share the gospel. So yeah, that's where the question becomes an interesting one. And I don't know if there's any other questions or comments that want to be made. It certainly is a question that could take the rest of our time, but that would be fine, all right?
I'll make one.
All right.
Disney's not nearly as bad as the government of China. Are you saying don't buy anything from China? And how are you going to go and be a missionary in China without eating something from China?
Sure.
Paul said throw them out of the church, but he said live among them.
Yeah, no, that's right. I mean, there is a way that you have to think about these things. I think, though, at the same time, that doesn't mean that we're going to say ignore the atrocities that are in China, right? I mean, so at the same time, would it be viable then to say, well, as a nation, we should boycott the Olympics? Absolutely, I think so. We're not saying we're never going to buy anything, but is there a way then to also engage this without just simply saying, well, I mean, if China makes all this stuff, how are we going to buy stuff? Well, that's not the only option. In other words, we're not just talking about two sides here, right? So I think there is a way, though, to address something like that, to say, well, yeah, I mean, if you're going to be a missionary, you're going to be in China, that you're going to have to buy stuff from people who are absolutely godless, right? Yes, absolutely. But at the same time, could there be ways, though, that you can engage that? Now, a missionary in China is a much different thing. Let's say us as Americans, are there ways that we would challenge, a nation like Christians would challenge a nation that is responsible for killing as many Christians as any other nation in the world right now? I think there could be. There could be ways we'd try and make a point. But again, to separate altogether, I don't know. Like I said, we can't get back in our cars. Talk about being made in China. We're just stuck here. All right, if we're not going to do anything, we're just stuck here now for the rest of our lives. I don't even know who made the carpet. I don't even know who made the pews. I don't know. I know who refashioned them. And I think some of this was good American companies. All right, I don't know that for sure, but anyway. So, Debbie. Yeah. So there is a difference. We're in this world, and there are ways in which we have to interact with this world, and engaging in some kind of formal relationship is much different than just, say, showing up and enjoying the services. Yes, it does send a different kind of a message. I think that's right. And it's also good to remember that, again, chapter 18 is addressing at the end. Like there's a very literal then statement here, where whoever is alive at the end is being told, run. Come out. In other words, make sure there's no lingering or lagging, right? Come out from them to avoid being intertangled with them. And I think then the encouragement to us, again, is that we would think carefully about our relationship to the world, because we'd love to think we would be a gospel influence, but at the same time, the world can also have a profound influence, right? And a leading astray. So we want to manage that. All right, so disentangle ourselves from the world. And then number 3, recognize the fragility of the world. It is a fragile system. And the rest of the chapter kind of lays this out. 3 major areas: politically, economically, and culturally. So we'll just go through them as we go. Look in verse 9. The kings of the earth who committed fornication and lived luxuriously with her will weep and lament for her when they see the smoke of her burning, standing at a distance for fear of her torment, saying, Alas, alas, that great city Babylon, that mighty city, for in 1 hour your judgment has come. Notice, by the way, how this judgment has become more and more imminent. Verse 8 said, Therefore her plagues will come in 1 day. And now you've got the kings looking on to the world system, lamenting and saying, in 1 hour your judgment has come. So these first few verses are, again, the words of the kings. So the kings of the nations, those who had received their power from the system of the world, will lament and weep at her falling. It's, again, just another reminder to us that no matter how politically powerful somebody may seem, it will fall. It will fall. We may not see it in our day. I don't know what will happen in our day, but I can tell you in the day, in that day, it will all crumble. The political powers will then see it for what it is. And this language of them standing at a distance, again, I think that's just kind of imagery as a way to describe there's nothing they're going to be able to do about it. There's no publicity arm that can repair this. All right, there's no way to recraft this. This is a done deal. But then you see this judgment then on the economic system. Verse 11. And the merchants of the earth will weep and mourn over her, for no one buys their merchandise anymore. Merchandise of gold and silver, precious stones and pearls, fine linen and purple, silk and scarlet, every kind of citron wood, every kind of object of ivory, every kind of object of most precious wood, bronze, iron, and marble, and cinnamon and incense, fragrant oil and frankincense, wine and oil, fine flour and wheat, cattle and sheep, horses and chariots, and bodies and souls of men. This is an interesting statement there at the end. But he goes through a litany here of the economic system that is being dismantled. There will be weeping because no longer will these merchants be able to peddle their wares, as it were, right? With that last one, I think, being a reference to slavery of various forms that history has known, still around in various forms today. And then it says in verse 14, the fruit that your soul longed for has gone from you, and all the things which are rich and splendid have gone from you, and you shall find them no more at all. The merchants of these things who became rich by her will stand at a distance for fear of her, torment, weeping and wailing and saying, Alas, alas, that great city that was clothed in fine linen, purple and scarlet, and adorned with gold and precious stones and pearls, for in 1 hour such great riches came to nothing. Every shipmaster, all who travel by ship, sailors, and as many as trade on the sea, stood at a distance and cried out when they saw the smoke of her burning, saying, What is like this great city? They threw dust on their heads and cried out, weeping and wailing, saying, Alas, alas, that great city in which all who had ships on the sea became rich by her wealth, for in 1 hour she is made desolate. Rejoice, over her, O heaven, and you holy apostles and prophets, for God has avenged you on her. So, we have the second group, the merchants, and they see the burning of the city, the fall of Babylon, this worldly system that made them rich. You know what I find interesting about this? And I don't ever want to read into the amount of material devoted to one subject over another as necessarily making a theological point. But I find it interesting that we have 2 verses lamenting the political system's demise, and then we have a dozen verses lamenting the economic demise. Politics comes and goes, right? What we do with our money and how we make our money, now you just go on to meddling, right? I mean, it gives a whole lot more detail, doesn't it? It's really interesting, this kind of worldliness at play, this kind of materialism at play, that what's being identified is just this desire for the things of the world. And isn't it interesting how they lament? They weep over it. What don't they weep over? Sin. They don't weep over their sin. There's no weeping over, oh, God has judged us. I mean, maybe they're saying that. The text doesn't say it. The text says they weep because the city is burning. This which made them so wealthy, that even in the midst of seeing God's judgment being poured down upon it, what are they doing? They're still longing for it. Still longing for this system. And we have all kinds of stuff, right? We not only have merchants, we got shipmasters, and we got all kinds of materials being described here, and they're going to throw dust on their heads as if they were engaged in this kind of real, repentant kind of weeping, but it's not. It's like a perverted form of it. And then it ends by saying, so heaven, you should rejoice over her fall. I know that sounds strong, right? It even sounds a little strange to think that we would do that. But this is that which glorifies God. God's judgment does glorify Him. Kind of in a way we were talking about this morning. God is glorified. His name is excellent to the ends of the earth. He makes Himself known. Now, how would we want to see that? We would want to see that in the salvation of souls, right? We would want to see that in the gospel, tearing through the world and making disciples left and right. And we pray that that would happen and we would glorify God as such. But when these who continue in rebellion and disobedience face God's judgment, that is also something to say, God, you are a God of great glory. It is an act that glorifies God. And so heaven can rejoice because God has avenged those who had been persecuted by her. All right, so next week we'll jump into the third part here in verse 21. Then we'll get into, in 2 weeks. Then we'll get into chapter 19. And I think, if I've worked this out, before I go on my sabbatical, before we get into VBS, I think Jesus will return. That's not a prophecy. I don't mean literally. I mean in the text. All right. I think Jesus will return before we shut this thing down for a little while. Okay. But that's what I'm hoping to do, to get us into chapter 19, and then we got a lot to deal with. All right. We're not done when Jesus returns. In fact, we're not even nearly close to being done with the controversy just when Jesus returns. There's other controversy coming. All right. Let's pray together. Father God, thank you again for the gathering of your people on this Lord's Day. We have been blessed to be together, to be able to sing together and pray together and study your word together, and to again come together tonight and pray and study your word. We are blessed. We are blessed by the freedom we enjoy to do this. We are blessed by this gift of your word that you've given us a sure and certain and infallible truth. And though we confess we don't understand it all in all of its fullness, we thank you for that which we do, for the clarity that comes to us in the areas where we desperately need clarity. May we see this world for what it really is, and our responsibility in it, to be in it but not of it, to see those around us come to know Christ, and then to recognize there's a limited amount of time for them to do so. And that this world is destined to fall by your hand. And so, God, may we invest in these things which are eternal and which honor You. I thank You again for these who agreed to be a part of this time tonight, and now we look forward to the week that is ahead, and I pray for them, and I pray for the roles and responsibilities that You have for them as they'll enter into the week. And though it is varied among the group here, we ask for wisdom for each role and responsibility, that wisdom would be granted, so that we might be faithful to You, glorifying You, our great and mighty God. That's in Christ's name we pray. Amen.